Mishmash! Kitbashed Corner!
Hey, today we're going to be doing kind of a weird kit bash. Several months ago, I mentioned I wanted to do a paint pot kit bash, and I finally did it. The idea behind this was, well, several different things, but most commonly and the most obvious is probably Iron Harvest. Excellent art style and somewhat mediocre RTS, but it's not bad. But the biggest thing that I wanted to achieve with this kit bash is that I wanted to make this look as if it could fit into several different games. I think with the components I used and with slight modification, you could fit this into several different profiles. Warhammer, Quar, Trench Crusade, a really wacky version of Bolt Action, and of course a big component is how you paint the model. But without further ado, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you like what you see, share it with a friend, and if you really dig it, consider becoming a channel member. For just $3 a month, you can see my videos early, and for $5, you get access to weekly Q&As, exclusive roles within the Mishmash Discord, and it just generally really helps me out. If you join the Discord, you can send in your dudes for a review, and you get to see some sneak peeks on what I'm working on. Just want to give a huge thank you to my channel members. You guys are amazing. And additionally, if you're interested in anything Wargames Atlantic, especially Quar stuff, you can use my affiliate link down below. It doesn't cost you anything, and it just helps the channel. But enough of the promotional stuff, let's get into the kit bashing. Alrighty, so the first thing that you're gonna need is an old paint pot from Citadel. I actually juggled between a few different designs, and I'm almost tempted to make more of these guys as time goes on, but I opted to use the classic 12ml pot. I was tempted to use the 18ml just to give me a little bit more space to work with in terms of adding on bits, but I think the 12 is perfect. Plus, I really want to use one of the smaller ones for a different kind of design. Maybe a tractor of sorts. God, I say tractor now. First thing we're going to want to do, if you haven't been paying attention, is peeling off the logo and just pulling out the old paint. I don't really plan on building an interior, but this old paint will get in the way for the legs. It was kind of a pain in the ass initially, but it didn't take too long. Now the second thing we're going to do is we're going to drill a hole all the way through the paint pot. If you have eyeballs, you'll probably notice that the paint was still well within the pot when I was doing this. I highly suggest pulling the paint out first and then drilling the holes. We'll really want to make sure that these are symmetrical as well. It's okay if there's a little bit of an offset, it won't matter too much, but the next step will ensure that these two pieces are interconnected, and to do so, we'll be fitting a paper clip between these two holes within the pot. Once it's aligned and within the pot itself, we can then clip each end, leaving just a little bit of excess on the outside, and we can glue it within the pot itself. It's kind of awkward, I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but I was just kind of having fun with it. It's pretty structurally sound, and if you want to, you can remove the top of the pot just to clean out extra paint. Once I was happy with the placement, I decided to glue on a faceplate from an Imperial Guard Sentinel, but I would actually swap this out later on for a different faceplate. However, I do strongly consider using this one for another one if you want to make two of these. The general principle of this design philosophy applies here anyway. We're just gluing on a faceplate to the front of the pot. Next, I decided to add some armaments, and I'm using this autocannon from the Imperial Guard Chimera kit. This gun was kind of a key factor in making this thing look kind of universal in its design. As I mentioned previously with all those other games, this gun is super generic and it can be applied to just about any of them. And all I'm doing is just kind of lazily gluing it on the side. Looks fine, don't really need to fuss with it. Now switching to the back of the mech, I'm going to be gluing on these little rung pieces, and I believe this is from one of the Gene Cult Acolyte vehicles. Because of the size of this mech, we only really need two of them. Plus, with the legs that I add on, I don't even really know if this is realistic, it just looks cool. Now on the side of the mech, I decided to glue on this fuel canister. Which, yeah, I know that's really stupid, but it looks cool. What can you say? The whole thing is stupid, it looks cool. That's all that matters. That's a really bad idea. But up next, this is where I ended up switching the faceplate. This one comes from the Def Dread kit, and it is way more form-fitting. I really like how it looks, and it gives kind of a more menacing vibe than the previous one. Like I said, the Sentinel faceplate looks really good, and I'm sure I'll use it for another one. I think it would be really cool to use on a smaller pot for more of a scouting vehicle. But I can't really deny this makes it look so much cooler and so much more grimdark. Gluing it in place was a little bit of a challenge, but it worked pretty well over time. Oh, okay. Yeah, surprisingly this didn't work as well because I used a little too much super glue, and I did this on purpose. I wanted to give the impression of weld lines. But once it was in place, it was time to fit on the legs, and for this, I'm using some walker legs from Star Wars Legion. I don't really care for Star Wars Legion anymore, so I thought it was about time that I used these. Adding them on was kind of a challenge at first. I kind of fit them on the pegs of the paper clip first, and then I would glue them to a base, but because of the size of the mech and how awkward everything fit together, it didn't work. So I ended up using a bigger base. This is a proper 90mm base. It's a little excessive, yes, but I like having more real estate to have fun with the basing. Though I did kind of go generic with it. I might try this again later. As you can see, all I ended up doing was gluing the feet in, and then I would fit the paint pot in place. It took a little while to stick, but little dollops of drive-by glue would make things fit together nicely. Overall, it's not a realistic design. I'm not going for that, and this kind of proves it. This thing would fall over like a newborn giraffe. But I gotta say, I was pretty chuffed at this point. And now is when we get into the little nitty-gritty details. Underneath the autocannon, I decided to slide in this little generic core backpack. It's just kind of a generic rectangle shape, and you could either paint this as a leathery backpack, or just paint it as a mechanical component underneath the gun. That little area beneath it was a little naked in my eyes, and I don't think you'll really notice this regardless. Up next, I decided to add on this nice lamp from the same Chimera kit. This kind of added a little bit more balance on the other side of the mech, and it was pretty easy to glue on. I just used a little bit more super glue, and again, this was to give the impression of weld lines. It kind of worked out. It's not great, but I can't say I'm unhappy with it. And it really does add that nice little bit of balance. Going back to the mech once more, I added on this little backpack from the Iron Squat Prospectors as a little bit of a motor gauge of sorts. I don't really know what you would call this. It's just a cool mechanical bit, and it gives me the excuse to paint other colors that will contrast with the main color. It fit relatively nicely too. But I felt that the underside of the faceplate felt a little bald on the mech, so I ended up using an Arbites shield, and I would sand it down significantly. I'd have to trim off most of the details to make the sanding actually worthwhile. But overall, this left me with a relatively simplistic but effective mechanical door panel of sorts, or just extra armor. Part of me thinks it would look really cool to glue one of these where I put the Iron Squat Prospector backpack, just as kind of an escape hatch of sorts, but I still like how it looks overall. Something for you guys to try out. The process to actually sand this thing down really did take quite a while. There's a lot of little details on here that made it kind of difficult to glue on. So I ended up using a much more low-grade grit on my sanders, just to make sure that I really scraped away the excess. But before I glued it on, I decided I wanted to add a little bit of battle damage to the overall mech. And to do so, I'm just kind of adding in these harsh scrapes and bullet holes. Nothing that's completely penetrating the armor, but just some things to add a little bit more character. As you can tell, this was before I decided to use this as a faceplate, so these little scrapes and scratches were kind of sporadic. But it is kind of a good idea because it gives a little bit more for the faceplate to adhere to. Now I finally glued it in place, and I think it looks alright. But we'll add more details on to make it look a little bit more fitting. Right now it looks a little weird. Using my X-Acto knife, I decided to carve on additional scrapes and scratches, just to add in a little extra layer of detail. Plus, using a far more narrow blade allows you to kind of dig in as if you were using a drill, and it makes adding in the little bullet holes and scrapes all the easier. Next thing I decided to do is I felt this thing looked a little naked on the underside as well. And as a way of adding ballast to the overall mech, I decided to add this hook from one of the GW terrain kits. It's very heavy and, okay, don't make the joke. It's pretty obvious, I know, I'm just setting myself up for this. But overall, I think it looks cool. And it makes it look a little bit more ragtag. There's a bit of an element of this being sort of a thrown together piece of equipment already, and I think this really adds on to it. And to me, it also kind of gives the vibe that this was an industrial piece of equipment that was converted for the sake of warfare. I don't know, I get yappy when I talk about kit bashing. I think it's one of the best parts of the hobby is when you can figure out where these little pieces lie. But as you can see, I would also add in those little bullet holes on the overall shield. I think it does kind of give the impression that this was welded in place as a last-minute effort, again kind of giving the impression that this is a thrown-together piece of equipment. But with everything in its place, it's time to paint this little guy up. And to do so, I ended up using a very industrial looking scheme. And not to promote myself too much, but I actually ended up streaming most of the painting process. And I will say, the basing process was something that I wasn't exactly sure what to do with, because at the end of the day I wanted to make this feel kind of universal. So I ended up kind of making a grassy knoll of sorts, well combined with a sort of battle mire. Overall, I think it's okay. It could be easily converted and added on to make it look a little bit better, and if I really want to go crazy with it, I could just strip the entire thing. But overall, I'm really happy with this model. It was super duper fun to build, the painting process was enjoyable, and above everything else, made me want to build more of them. I kinda wish I built a couple of these for the video, but this was a project that I kinda had in cold storage, as I have some very big projects coming up that I'm really excited to show you guys. But I've definitely been flapping my beak enough for one video. Make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you liked what you saw, share with a friend, and remember to mishmash, kitbash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna. I promise. See ya!